On this Monday night, crisis in Brazil. Rioters ransack Congress and the Supreme Court, refusing to accept election results, the parallels to the January 6th attack in Washington. Remarkable recovery. NFL star Damar Hamlin is back in Buffalo a week after collapsing during a game. And the mother of a potentially life-saving invention, the Ontario woman using her head to help young sick cyclists.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in Brazil after what's been described as a failed assault on the country's democratic institutions. Security forces are now restoring calm after the worst attacks since the end of Brazil's military dictatorship. They stormed and ransacked government and court buildings on Sunday. Supporters of Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's far-right former president, who was narrowly defeated, believe that election was stolen, though there's no evidence to back that up. Hundreds of rioters were rounded up today, put on dozens of buses and detained for questioning. At the same time, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau touched down in Mexico City for a summit with the Mexican and American presidents. The so-called Three Amigos summit will focus on North America, but all three leaders condemned the riots in Brazil and pledged their support for Brazil's democracy. Political violence in such a big and influential country is deeply worrying and has echoes of what happened in the U.S. 2 years ago. Eric Sorensen has our top story tonight.
It was a night of violence unlike anything Brazil has seen since returning to democratic government almost 40 years ago. All three branches of government, the Congress, the Presidential Palace, and the Supreme Court, were stormed by supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro, who has not accepted the results of last October's election. Police in the capital Brasilia have detained more than 1,200 people, many taken by bus to be held and questioned. President Lula da Silva's emergency decree put federal authorities in charge as police regained control. Damage was extensive, but this morning Lula was in the presidential palace meeting with his cabinet, showing the elected government is still in place. Bolsonaro, who was close to former U.S. President Donald Trump, is in Florida and reportedly now in hospital. He posted that invasions of public buildings are outside the rule of law. Prime Minister Trudeau and the presidents of the United States and Mexico issued a joint statement prior to their summit that the three countries condemned the attacks on Brazil's democracy and on the peaceful transfer of power. Many Brazilians condemn the attacks. You don't need to break anything, he says, accept the election results.
There is no kind of Brazilian embrace of the big lie like you had in the United States.
Brazil is the world's fourth largest democracy, but has teetered on instability. A military coup in the 1960s ended democratic elections for more than 20 years, and the country remains deeply divided on the right and left and between rich and poor.
It's a more fragile democracy, right? So this is very concerning because it shows kind of how vulnerable the current government is.
Many in the West have high hopes for Lula as a climate believer who's promised to preserve the Amazon rainforest, and as a counter to right-wing populism in that part of the world.
What Lula needs to do is what he's been talking about doing, which is to try to raise up a lot of the people within the Brazilian economy and society that have suffered.
A tent city with Bolsonaro supporters has been the center of peaceful demonstrations for weeks. But after Sunday night's rampage, even this non-violent form of protest is being dismantled by Brazilian security forces. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
The parallels between what happened in Brazil and what took place 2 years ago in the U.S. Capitol in Washington are obvious. An attack on democratic institutions, a huge security breach, law enforcement heavily outnumbered at the start. The riots in Brazil were much bigger than at the U.S. Capitol, but as Jackson Proskow reports, they appear to be inspired by what happened in Washington.
A near carbon copy of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the storming of Brazil's Congress followed the same playbook, with a mob fueled by social media lies about a stolen election, carrying banners, telegraphing conspiracy theories about voting machines.
It was very clear that the germ of the idea had been planted in January 6th and was brought back to Brazil.
The warning signs were all there. Ousted Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has long been described as the Donald Trump of the tropics. The two ex-leaders are friends. Bolsonaro has been taking advice directly from former Trump strategists like Jason Miller and has the backing of longtime Trump advisor Steve Bannon, a central figure in the global far-right movement and the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
All all hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Bannon has been cheering on the rioters in Brazil as freedom fighters, using his podcast to push lies about election fraud in Brazil.
Very stark warning to MAGA and to all the Republicans of the games that are being played in these elections.
You have large numbers of pro-Bolsonaro supporters who have been fed a steady diet of conspiracy and misinformation and disinformation.
As Bolsonaro takes refuge in Florida, there are questions about whether the violence may not only have been inspired, but planned in the U.S.
This will be a question for the Brazilian investigation.
2 years after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, election denialism and political violence may stand as a new and dangerous American export. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Now to the summit of leaders from Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. Among the issues expected to loom large at the summit in Mexico City is energy policy. As David Akin reports, contentious issues on the agenda could test just how friendly the meeting of North American leaders will be.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau lands in Mexico for talks about climate, immigration, trade, and improving people-to-people ties.
I think it is important for Canadians to know that Mexicans are very interested in Canada.
But Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden also want to address a major dispute over Mexico's energy market. They say the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is violating North American trade agreements by giving control of the energy market there to Mexico's state energy companies.
I know that both President Biden and I are going to be, fairly clear with President López Obrador that this needs to be understood.
López Obrador believes his policy is a matter of national sovereignty.
He has a view of Mexican energy that goes back to Lázaro Cárdenas in 1934, right? Who nationalized the oil. That's just his view of what Mexico should be.
Trudeau, though, will make a case for free trade on behalf of Canadian firms, which have already invested $13 billion in Mexican energy projects that create jobs back in Canada.
I understand he wants to put more of an emphasis on the state-owned energy companies, but it has to be done in a responsible way and in a way that understands that he's a part of NAFTA and he has to abide by those rules.
And many in Mexico will be on Canada's side.
There is a huge concern in Mexico about what is happening in the energy sector and the investments from Canada.
Trudeau met Monday with members of Mexico's business community, a business community keen to court more Canadian investment.
Because there is a lot of interest and they are trying to push inside of Mexico to help the government to understand what Canada and Canada's businesses needs from Mexico's policies and regulations.
Separately, Trudeau and Biden will have their own one-on-one meeting Tuesday morning, just before the summit formally gets underway. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
It has been decades in the making. The Canadian government has finally finalized a deal to replace this country's aging fleet of CF-18 fighter jets. The agreement to buy 88 F-35 warplanes is an about-face for the Liberal government. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said in the past it wouldn't happen because of concerns over costs. Mackenzie Gray reports on what's changed now.
After years of debate, it's wheels up for the F-35. The federal government choosing it as Canada's next-generation fighter jet.
The F-35 is a modern, reliable, and agile fighter aircraft.
The Defense Department will pay $19 billion to buy 88 F-35s, but over the jet's 30-year life cycle, maintenance cost brings the total to a staggering $70 billion. The first 4 planes will be delivered by 2026, with the entire fleet being sent by 2034.
I think in the end, the government made the right decision, and it's good to see them finally start moving forward and taking the formal steps we need to take to actually start getting modern airplanes into the service of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
The new jets are the most advanced on the market, replacing the aging CF-18s that Canada's used since 1982. But it was a long path to purchase the F-35s. In 1997, Jean Chrétien signed up for a development program, allowing Canadian businesses to help build the jet. Stephen Harper signed a deal to purchase the F-35 in 2010, but Justin Trudeau vowed to pull out of the contract.
A Liberal government will also do what the Harper Conservatives ought to have said years ago. We will not buy the F-35 fighter jet.
But after winning the 2015 election, Trudeau changed his tune. The Liberals purchased Australian Super Hornets to prop up an aging fleet and opened a competition that led to today's purchase.
The aircraft has matured, and we see now that many of our allies, 8 countries in particular, are using the F-35.
Former Chief of the Defense Staff Tom Lawson believes today's announcement sends the right message to the international community.
I think the thing to keep the eye on today is Canada now looks more serious as an ally and as a defense partner.
The next big challenge, training pilots on the new jets. That's set to start in 2026. But in the interim, the Canadian government will continue to spend hundreds of millions of dollars keeping the CF-18s in combat shape, Donna, and they'll be over 50 years old by the time the F-35s are ready to go.
I remember it well. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. There is more good news about the recovery of NFL player Damar Hamlin, who collapsed and went into cardiac arrest on the field a week ago. The Buffalo Bills player has been released from the hospital in Cincinnati. He's flown back to Buffalo. He's still in the hospital there, but doctors say he has been walking and eating, and he appears to be neurologically completely intact. They say there's no reason to believe he won't continue his path to recovery. They credit the quick action on the field, including CPR and defibrillation, for saving his life after his heart stopped. Hamlin received immediate life-saving care. Here in Canada, the husband of a mother of 3 who died in a hospital emergency room is demanding answers. 37-year-old Allison Holthoff became ill on the morning of New Year's Eve. Her husband took her to emergency. He says they waited more than 6 hours to be seen by a doctor while her excruciating pain became worse. By the time she began receiving care, it was too late.
And I guess there was a small chance we could break it into an OR. And there was a small potential chance, but the odds were not in her favor. It was more likely that she was going to die in the cold OR.
The Nova Scotia Health Minister says the department is investigating. Holthoff's family has not yet been provided with autopsy results. There's a warning for Canadians about a scam that has stripped people of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Nova Scotia Securities Commission says people receive unsolicited text messages directing them to click on a cryptocurrency trading site. Advice is then offered through a secondary messaging platform like WhatsApp. And if someone transfers funds, the scammer then shows fake returns on the investment. When the victim attempts to withdraw those funds, the scammer disappears and then resurfaces as someone offering to recoup the losses for a fee. At this point, the scammer has access to the funds and the victim's personal information, such as bank account details. The Commission is warning people not to reply to unsolicited messages. Western Australia's devastating flooding coming up, the hundreds left homeless, plus the pledge for Pakistan still struggling after last summer's disaster. At least 280 people in a remote area of Australia's outback have been forced from their homes after a massive flood. The crisis in the Kimberley region was sparked by a severe weather system, which brought a year's worth of rain to some areas in just a matter of days. Australia's Prime Minister has promised to help repair the communities ravaged by the floods. An emergency services minister says it has been the worst flooding in Western Australia's history. The international community has promised more than $12 billion to help Pakistan recover from devastating floods. That figure came out of a UN conference on rebuilding efforts and covers just over half of the estimated $21 billion needed in the short term.
I am deeply frustrated that global leaders are not giving this life or death emergency the action and the investment it requires. Because words are not enough. Without action, climate catastrophe is coming for all of us.
Pakistan is expected to come up with the rest of the recovery funding. The UN is calling for major changes to the international financial system to allow low-income countries to get adequate funding from wealthier nations after disasters. At least 1,700 people were killed, 8 million others displaced from Pakistan's flooding in September, and about 5 million are still living near stagnant floodwaters. Potentially life-saving invention next, the Canadian mother bridging safety and inclusion. Whether you're riding a bike, a skateboard, or a scooter, helmets can protect you from serious head and brain injuries. But if you wear religious headwear on a daily basis, it's not easy to find a helmet that fits. For years, sick adults and children have struggled with whether to make safety the priority over their religious beliefs when participating in some activities. And now, as Neetu Garcha explains, a mother in Ontario has come up with a solution that means no compromise is necessary.
So we're going to open it up, and now you put it on.
Tina Singh is holding what she hopes will be a solution for parents like her all over the world.
1 to 2 finger spaces above the eyebrow.
The mother of 3 boys designed this helmet created specifically for sick kids who keep their hair in a top-knot bun and a cloth covering called a patka.
They don't need mom to change the way that they've tied their hair or do anything different for them. They can just put it on and go. The colors for this launch are these ones here.
So after about 2 years of testing and multiple iterations, Singh has released what she calls the first safety-certified multi-sport helmet specifically designed for sick kids.
It's a part of my kids' identity, right? It's a part of the identity and who they are.
She says the helmet is certified for kids over the age of 5 for use with bikes, inline skates, kick scooters, and skateboarding.
I was put in the position of, being an occupational therapist who works in the area of acquired brain injury, but not having a helmet that fit my boys properly.
All activities that weren't a safe option for her adventurous boys.
Ride a bike, jump off the ramp.
With it now in the production phase and sales set to launch soon in Canada, the boys are excited about not only the product,
we have each different colors or sizes,
but also being able to do activities safely like other kids their age.
I don't think she's gonna say anything now that we got this.
The conversation around helmet safety for sick adults has resulted in other inventions like this tough turban made of bulletproof material, as well as helmet exemptions in some provinces. But Singh says this is the first time she's seen a product focus on kids who wear patkas.
This is not meant to cover a full turban, full dastar, anything like that. This is meant for kids who need that protection while participating in sports.
And Singh says her mission is to improve the inclusion, diversity, and safety of kids in sport.
I would love to make one for hockey because it's been in such demand from people once they heard about this, saying it would be really great because a helmet is mandatory for hockey and our kids want to participate.
And she hopes this is only the beginning of product diversity in the market to reduce barriers for kids like hers. Neetu Garcha, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada are these bison sculptures at Wanuskewin Heritage Park, just north of Saskatoon. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.